So, Dr. Bill, it's a great pleasure for us having you in this podcast. I would like to start the podcast with a question so also our audience get to know you a little bit.
Sure.
Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you started in the media profession?
Yes, it's an honor to be here, Dennis. I'd like to start by saying, Edward R. Murrow, the great American journalist, had his phrase that said, speaking in front of a microphone like we are is a heady opportunity, and you have to be careful because you can get intoxicated, just like you can with a good wine. I don't drink wine, but I'm told that that's what happens. And what he was really talking about is ego. So one of the things I've tried to do as I've gone around the world, having a wonderful, blessed career, really teaching journalists from over 30 countries, is to help the journalists understand the story isn't about them, and it's really easy with all the apparatus of lights and cameras and makeup and all that stuff, but it's really about the people. My career began in the 1980s, early 80s, in local television in the United States. I did radio in Washington, D.C., radio in New York as an intern. But my real first venture into broadcasting happened in Anchorage, Alaska, when I was a disc jockey from midnight till 6 a.m. playing records, hits at the time. Today, I still have a large record collection. And I was known on the radio back then as William on the Wireless.
Wow. So that's where the love for the vinyl started, right?
Exactly. And I collect records today. And of course, some of your listeners won't even know what vinyl is, although probably some of them will. It's like it skipped a generation because all the iGen have gone back doing vinyl. 2 degrees from BYU, Brigham Young University. It's the largest private church-sponsored university in America. And then my master's is from the Missouri School of Journalism, the oldest in the country. And then for about 20 years, I was at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications. And that's where really the global opportunities took off, including my first chance to come to Albania 5 years ago.
How do you see Albanian? You have been here 5 years ago, and you are here again after 5 years.
Things are changing. There's lots more building going on. The city feels bigger and brighter. I know there's still corruption, sadly. There's still challenges that the government faces. And especially most recently in the story we've been doing here with the Albanian Center for Quality Journalism, I'm touched and sort of discouraged a little bit from the behalf of the young people, which is the future of this country, because they are the future of this country, and really they're caught in a dilemma of staying or going and building up their nation here. But the people are friendly, the food is fantastic, and just don't tell the Americans about it because it's the most undiscovered, beautiful place, probably still really cheap on the beaches for houses and to rent for a week or a month. Yeah, it's a beautiful coastline in the mountains. It's so spectacular.
Yeah, as you said, we have a very beautiful coastline, and also we are trying now to develop mountain tourism as well.
And that's what I'm worried about. Then you will, and you'll be great because you're so beautiful, and then it'll be expensive. So
Let's keep it a secret.
let's keep it a secret. No, it's be good for the country if it could develop. Because I think your tourism potential, your beaches, everything, the food, the people, you've got everything going for it. And it's Montenegro and Croatia, your neighbors next door.
Well, let's hope that in some years we are going to be a main destination for tourism. And that also will keep the young people in the country.
Yes, it will. It will.
So, Dr. Bill, just to get back to the journalism field, you have been traveling a lot in the world, maybe 30 countries or more. Can you say what are some of the most interesting thing and memorable places that you have been, but also how this experience have shaped your perspective on journalism?
One of the first places I went internationally was actually to Kosovo in 2003, not long after the hostilities and war. Peace had broken out, basically. And I was impressed with the bravery of those journalists that we worked with at those different stations. And ever since then, in whatever country I've gone to, most recently this year in Sri Lanka, I've met journalists who are courageous, truth tellers. They don't care what the government says. They risk their lives. I'm impressed with the bravery of the journalists, but I'm also impressed every journalist I've met is a storyteller. And I wish the audience could meet the journalists off camera. They would become their best friends because they're great storytellers. Whether you're doing it around a table or if you're at a bar or wherever, You're having good conversation with good people. And if a journalist can capture the ability to tell a story, then you can hold an audience. And especially today with crazy technology like these phones and TikTok and ChatGPT and whatever's coming, in the next 6 months or the next 6 years, it's always still going to be about the audience.
So that's the challenge.
It is a challenge. It's a huge challenge.
Do you think that the journalists today are working in the right direction to keep their audience always engaged with them?
Yes, traditional journalists are. The other thing that's happened, of course, because of the advent of the phone and the internet, is the audience thinks they're the journalist. They're never the journalist. Okay, come on. They're not trained. I wouldn't go to an audience member to fix me if I needed to go to the hospital. I'd go to somebody professionally trained, a doctor. So please get your news from a journalist. But we're happy to hear ideas you have about stories. You can take interesting pictures that happen in your neighborhood on a phone, but please don't trust the wannabe journalists who are on social media or on Facebook or some other platform. Trust a good journalist, because that's the important thing, so that the truth, because we're dealing with something so very important. We're dealing with nations' lives. We're dealing with a war that, happening in Ukraine. It's critical. We're dealing with politics, especially dynamic politics in the United States and elsewhere around the country. So you need some well-trained truth tellers. Credible, objective truth tellers. I come and have spent 20 years of my life at the Walter Cronkite School, and he's a very famous American journalist. Famous because he was there when Kennedy was assassinated, so he covered that funeral. He was there when man walked on the moon. He was there during Watergate. He was there during Vietnam. And Walter Cronkite always stood for traditional, fair and balanced, objective journalism. Now, today, it's sort of hard to figure out, well, what's objective, You have a different background than I do. And it used to be, well, we had to set our backgrounds on over here. We couldn't even talk about who I was as a person because then I wouldn't be objective. Well, I think we've slowly changed, not the notion of objectivity, but we've expanded it to also include what's called transparency. And that's very important. Because when you get marginalized communities, LGBT, women, whoever's been marginalized before or might be in the future for whatever reason, part of who you are as a journalist, you bring that to your story. You can't erase the fact of who your grandmother was, what your heritage is. I'll try to give that in a concrete example. So my parents were both really diehard environmentalists. They loved the environment, and so one of the first stories I covered as a TV reporter was a mining company in northern Idaho, a state in the western United States called Bunker Hill. And they had been, guilty or accused at least of pollution and stuff like that. When I went to cover that story as a young journalist, the mining company were the bad guys because I grew up with my parents saying the mining companies are the bad guys. So you have to, but I can't erase what my parents taught me. So transparency, is a new thing. And with social media, I can, on my Twitter profile, you can look up and figure out, well, what kind of a journalist are you? Are you this journalist or are you that journalist? But I don't know. There's so many audience choices and so many voices out there that it's very hard for the audience and for young journalists to figure out where they fit.
Yeah, there are also a lot of media outlets that they can choose. It's not like in the old times when there were only 2 or 3 radio stations and your choices were only one or the other. Nowadays only, for example, in Albania, just to give some numbers, we have like 800 news portals.
That's mind-blowing.
Officially, inside Albania live like 2.8 million people. So even the audience sometimes is in dilemma where to go to find the news. But since we are talking about the challenges that the media is facing, I would like to know what have been some of your challenges in your professions and how you overcome them.
That's a great question. There's things that happen professionally and things that happen privately. Let me do the private, personal things first. Probably the biggest challenges a lot of journalists face is work-life balance. We work crazy hours. We work till 3 in the morning to edit documentaries. You know, you want to have some kind of normal life, your son's birthday party, and suddenly the pager back then or the phone today goes off and said, there's a plane crash, leave the birthday party and go. So it's been very hard for people in our profession, and that's why we get burned out a lot. That's why young students don't last maybe 3 or 4 years, and then they go sell real estate or something because they make more money, or public relations. So there's the personal challenges. Professionally, probably the biggest challenges I faced, and the one that haunt me the most, are ethical decisions. So I still remember my first murder that I covered. I still remember a story I did about a man who was accused of child abuse, and it was a horrible case. But because he didn't quite understand what was happening with all the TV cameras, you know, I think the journalist kind of took advantage of him, and I'm not sure he got a fair trial because he kind of said too much before he should have said too much. Or more concretely, you know, stories that we cover that are very tough, that impact people's lives, especially involving death and tragedy and things around that. There are ethics codes. There's good ethics codes in Albania. There are in the United States. Guidelines of what professional journalists should do no harm, minimize harm, always seek to tell the truth, those kinds of things. But today, with the drive for profits for news portals or newspapers or whatever, they want to make money. I mean, Rupert Murdoch is the global example, from Australia to England to Fox in the United States, of a journalist who can make money, and who can make money, I'm not going to say stretching the truth, but encouraging his news organization to potentially do some unethical things.
Just to get more audience and...
Yeah, and we have, you know, the consequences. I'll let the audience fill in the blank about what those consequences might be.
Since we are talking about ethical issues, in your experience, because before you going in teaching as a professor in one of the best schools that it's known in journalism, you also have been a journalist, as you said. How did you deal with ethical dilemmas in sensitive cases? You mentioned you remember the first murder that you covered. How did you decide which was too much information to give about the case? Because basically all the journalists know little more than what they say. Yes. But do we have like clear boundaries anymore about ethical issues in journalism?
Well, the challenge is my boundaries are different than your boundaries. And a bunch of ethical journalists might say this, and some competitor over there says, well, we're gonna publish the story anyway, even though we don't have attribution, or even though we don't have solid information. One of the best guidelines that I found is a Harvard sociologist, a woman named Cecilia Bach. And she says, when you face an ethical dilemma, the most important thing you do is look for alternatives. You have a dialogue in the newsroom, and there's a checks and balances on those ethical decisions. So are we going to publish this? How much bloody video are we going to show? Are we going to offend the audience? Do we go with the story? Do we have enough sources? Well, that's not just Bill Silcock's decision or Dennis's decision. It should be a team decision. And you have more senior journalists, editors, news directors who help you. And so you look for alternatives. Is there another way of telling the story? If it's a rape victim without revealing her name, if it's, you know, children, if it's refugees. I mean, let's face it, video of refugees washing up on the shores of this continent is tragic video, but it's a powerful picture. And so how are you going to not, be unethical to these poor people who've risked their lives to go for hours on a boat and land up, in North Macedonia and walk through Albania or whatever. So there are guidelines. So you can look for alternatives. And then the most important thing, the thing that Cecilia Bach says that I really like, is she says, have a public dialogue about your decision. We as a news organization decided to do this. Here's why. If you disagree with us, go to our online portal and write out 3 paragraphs. So talk about your decisions. What you guys are doing here is fantastic with Table Talk. Behind the scenes is amazing. That's what the audience is fascinated with as much as the stories. How did you get this story? So let them in on the secret. Let them see how the news is created, not created, how it's made, how it works.
Nowadays, everything is changing like really fast in our profession.
Really fast.
A thing that I would like to know is that how do you stay informed in what's your main news outlets? How do you get informed about things happening?
Excellent question, Dennis. So I call this the media diet. So on my phone, I have a series of news apps that I use. Of course, I have CNN, BBC, Guardian, all the American major newspapers, American major networks. I also have Fox, I have MSNBC, which might be far left or far right, because I think you need to see everything. One of the places I always go to first every morning when I get up is the BBC. I just trust them. I feel more credible about them than the American networks. And then I'll often go to the Associated Press because it's a wire service, a global wire service. And the wire service is the fundamental source of news on a worldwide basis. And so I always check the wires. That's an old habit of being a TV producer, but also the BBC. But like the story like this has just happened even as I've been here in Albania this week of political news coming out of the United States, I want to get different perspectives on it. So
basically, you have like all the major outlets on your phone.
Yes. But I also have feeds. So I have a Twitter feed, I have an Instagram feed, I have a Facebook feed, I have a LinkedIn feed. I find a lot of stories on LinkedIn. But the reason I have those social things, because people will share, of course, and I can't do everything. I can't expect to read everything, but you're going to read stuff I'm not going to read. And so if I follow you, then I'm going to do that. There's a concept, though, that I'll share that's called, the cooking world. Sometimes they compare making TV programs like cooking with recipes and stuff. It's called slow news. Have you ever heard of slow cooking? There's like slow food. It means it's like slow down. Americans eat their fast food in like 2 minutes, and Albanians eat their beautiful food in like 2 hours. But the same idea. Sometimes we just need to slow down. And the problem is the audience won't slow down. They'll flip the channel. And yet I think you have to be courageous enough as a journalist and as a news organization to think about, okay, maybe we'll do it a little slower. Maybe we'll do a little bit more thinking about it. Someone else can get the flashy headlines, but what you really want to know after the headlines is, why are there so many school shootings in the United States every week? Well, you can't tell that in the 30 seconds video of tragedy of parents outside schools. You can slow it down and try to look in the cultural clash that's going on in my country right now between First Amendment, people who love guns, and people who want to make sure that children stay alive.
Yeah, that'll be something fantastic to see it in the news circle, also in Albania, because if we have something that we have it a lot, it's just breaking news. But the slow news, you never find it.
There's a history of the word breaking news. We used to use it 20 years ago when I was a TV producer, very rarely. Like breaking news is if the Challenger exploded. Breaking news is a plane crash. Now, everything can't be breaking news.
Basically everything.
But that's all it's branded that way. It's ridiculous. And you know what? The audience is a lot smarter than many a television news consultant ever thinks they are. They get the fact that you're hyping the news to get more clicks or to get more people watching. So you need to respect the audience.
Before we were starting this podcast, I was just reading an article about ChatGPT, and I don't remember the author of it, but a quote stayed with me. It was like, AI will not get your job, but people who use AI will get your job. So maybe for the general public, this is something that maybe feels strange, but is it for journalists like an alarm that start and use the new technology so you don't fall behind?
Absolutely. So you got to stay ahead of the curve, figure out a way to harness the new technology. We used to, when I started in college, I shot on film. And then we shot on video, and now there's some little computer card in this camera over here. So it's changed, and so we have to stay up with the technology. The challenge in the process of doing that is surrounding yourself with people smarter than you are who can help you figure out what technology is really going to happen. And it's expensive sometimes, so you don't want to go invest in a lot of stuff that's not going to do any good. The other part, and probably the most important part, is figuring out why you're doing something. If you're doing something just because you want attention or you want to get heat, you burn something up because, hey, it's cool to see a fire down at during a speech on a campfire or out west where we go camping. That's one thing. The important thing is the difference between heat and light. So if it's something you're just doing because you want to get heat out of it, that's not really the really good reason. The reason is you want the light of the fire to bring you light and knowledge and information. So ChatGPT will revolutionize everything we know about the whole search process.
Maybe you think it will come a time that we don't say anymore Google it, but just ChatGPT.
Probably. And then something else will come along faster. I don't know if anybody's typed into ChatGPT, but you should. What's the next thing after ChatGPT? So you can get some money and invest in it.
So we talked about the challenges of our profession. We talked about the new things that are coming out. And I want, if you can tell us what are some of the must skills that every journalist should have, and the new skills that are being developed with the technology development and our working environment in journalism changing every 2 years maybe?
Yeah. So the most important skill, no matter what happens with the technology, is writing. You've always got to be a good writer. You have to have a command of the language. That includes everything from the grammar to the spelling, and there are Grammarly and devices we can use to fix the spelling and fix the grammar. But to understand and love language, so the best writers are voracious readers. I try to read fiction novels. I always have a fiction novel. In fact, next to my bed, my wife laughs at me. I have about 8 books because I never can read one book straight through. I have to read 3 or 4 books at the same time. Be a great reader of things, and not just journalism things, but read the great writers of this country. Understand the differences, the nuances, which I don't, between North Albanian and Southern Albanian, dialects and how they use words and those kinds of things. Because that will make, as you're a better writer, then you're going to be able to, if you're a better reader, you're going to be a better writer and craft those stories. So that's the number one skill. Be curious. I'm amazed how many students just are not curious about things anymore. And I'm going to blame it on the phone. I think this generation is everything's on this phone, and you just put your phone down and look in front of you and see what's there. Yeah, and there could be a beautiful picture that you're missing because you're so busy trying to take it on your phone.
Well, maybe they can look it later in
their phone. They want to preserve it. I don't mean to ding this generation. I love teaching them. They're wonderful, but they're different. They're motivated differently. They've had different lives, those especially who've gone through COVID. And can you imagine going through high school, which is your really maturing years of life, and you do it on Zoom? Never to have high school sweethearts or football games or graduations, and then suddenly to go from staying at your parents' house, doing high school on your Zoom, and then going to college. They've missed a chance that happens when you're 17 or 18 years old to really mature.
Basically, they lack that kind of experience.
Yeah, it's very lacking. The kind of students that we talk to this week at the university where you teach, I feel sorry for them because they missed an important part of the development and maturing process into adulthood. And so I think we need to cut them a little slack if all they want to do is stay on their phone, and if they're too scared to ask a question.
So we came to the end of this interview. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for being with us.
It's an honor to be here.
If you can give a message to young journalists, the students that are studying journalism, it would be great.
Well, I think the most important message I could share with them is to always try to listen. Journalists spend a lot of time talking, a lot of times doing things, rushing around, meeting deadlines. And I think one of the most important things, the journalists that have taught me the most are people who, I'm thinking of a great Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, John Hughes. He was a great listener. Oh my gosh, not just as a friend-to-friend conversation. He used to be the spokesperson for the United States State Department. You just have to learn the listening skills, and then you have to have the creativity and the freedom to take what you've heard through listening and figure out how to capture it into a picture, into a painting, into a graphic, into a soundbite, into a song. We tell stories in 1,000 different ways, in ways we probably haven't even thought of yet, because some new technology will come along and tell us that. Maybe they'll sing the news 20 years from now. I don't know. Probably not. But that's what I would do. So I'd figure out how you fit. And you don't have to do everything. Heaven knows I can't run a camera the way the great people, here at this center can do it. I can't edit the way the great people here at this center can do it. But I've been blessed to have some gifts to see things and to see color and stuff like that. Probably got that from my mom and those kinds of things. But you don't have to do everything. Just pick one part of this business that you want to do the best, and then surround yourself with the other people who fill that. Because it's not they talk about one-man band, and now I've got a phone, I can do it all myself, and I don't need all those people.
Yeah, but it's not like that.
It's not good, and it's not fun. You don't want to do that. You don't want a profession where you're just off doing your thing.
Spend like 40 years in a profession and just being by yourself.
No, because the greatest memories you'll have when you get to my point in life is looking back on the great stories. And you think about the story, but you think about the people you told the story with, or you sat in the editing bay till 4 a.m. meeting a deadline. That's what will happen. Be courageous. You do have a responsibility. You're needed like never before. And be willing also, though, at times to walk away. To walk away from the story because it ethically is against what you believe in. To walk away from the job because you're not going to be compromised. And that involves, a lot of different kinds of principles. But, that's the advice I'd give.
Thank you very much.
It's an honor to be here.
We look forward to have you back again in Albania.